Hello, my name is Rick Sheffer, and I'm an amateur history buff that loves all things Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in Emlenton, which is located along the Allegheny River, some 70 miles north of Pittsburgh and 90 miles south of Erie. I grew up with a fascination about the railroad that passed through our town, and it is this fascination that motivated me to create this video. It is the story of the building of the Allegheny Valley Railroad, from Pittsburgh to Oil City and eventually beyond. I hope you enjoy my presentation, so let's begin. Northwestern Pennsylvania in the early 1800s was hilly, forested, and sparsely populated. Transportation to nearby towns was by narrow dirt roads that meandered over rugged, mountainous terrain, or north and south by the mighty Allegheny River. Livelihoods were scratched out by timbering, farming, and up until the 1800s, the manufacturing of iron ore. The river provided the most efficient means of transporting people and goods to Pittsburgh, the major manufacturing hub of western Pennsylvania. Growing up along the river, I was fascinated by the river's parallel companion, the Allegheny Valley Railroad. Huge steam engines would chug into town, coming to a stop at the train station. Smoke, cinders, and ashes all over town as they waited for passengers to exit and board for destinations north and south. As kids in the early 1950s, trains and their steel tracks provided endless hours of fun and exploration. On a sunny day, we might decide to walk the tracks to explore Dead Dog Canyon, an old abandoned sandworks located atop the river hill south of town. Here, sandstone was mined years ago, crushed into sand and loaded on train cars, waiting patiently below for their fill. We couldn't wait to experience the ghosts that surely must still live among the rugged stone cliffs of this open mine. On another day, we might hike the tracks north to Daughter's Eddy, some 3 or 4 miles upriver, where the water was calm and deep. And just before you rounded the tracks to Daughter's Eddy sat a giant, weather-worn, rusted water tank, where steam locomotives stopped to fill up their gluttonous tanks, necessary to further their journey north or south. On the way home, we might stop at the railroad telegraph shack and watch the operator click out a message up the line to a fellow radio telegrapher. At a time when telephones were plentiful, we wondered why 19th century telegraph technology was still being used to monitor and control the train's movements in the 20th century. However, I'm kind of getting caught up in my old memories, so let's return to the subject at hand, the story of the Allegheny Valley Railroad. Our railroad had its beginnings in 1837, when it was originally incorporated as the Pittsburgh, Kittanning, and Warren Railroad. In 1852, the name of the line was changed to the Allegheny Valley Railroad as management looked north for business expansion. As the name implies, the railroad was to follow along the Allegheny River, connecting Pittsburgh with the upper city of Kittanning, Pennsylvania. 3 years later, a new service was offered by the railroad for communities north of Kittanning, as was recorded in an article published in the Emlenton newspaper, the Allegheny Valley Echo. It read, "New Allegheny Valley Railroad service north to Emlenton. Shippers and merchants are hereby notified that the Allegheny Valley Railroad Company has made arrangements with keel boats to run in connection from Kittanning to Mahoning, Red Bank, Brady's Bend, Emlenton, and all intermediate points." The article went on to say that at Kittanning, goods would be carefully handled from the depot to the wharf boats at the river. Boats would depart every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and the railroad keelboat system proved to be a great convenience, but it barely paid its way until the discovery of seismic proportions to the region, to the country, and to the world. It occurred in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1869 when a drilling bit at the Drake well struck oil at 69 feet. This event marked the beginning of the global oil industry and new life for the region and for the Allegheny River Valley Railroad. A plan was quickly put in place for a new 132-mile railroad extension from Kittanning to Oil City, with the goal of capitalizing on the emerging new gold rush. Black gold, that is. Oil wells began springing up in the region between Oil City and Titusville at an amazing rate. Entrepreneurs from all parts of the country headed toward western Pennsylvania looking for ground to lease, to take their hand at drilling for oil, and in the process, making themselves rich beyond belief. Because of Oil City's proximity to the oil fields and the Allegheny River, it became the obvious center for the new industry. Drilling supplies to meet the incredible demand could only come by steamboat from Pittsburgh during the spring and fall when the river was high. And during these times, drilling supplies and passengers would be shipped to Oil City and return loaded with barrels of oil and returning passengers. The railroad, in contrast, could run year-round and thus provide a much more reliable shipping and transportation advantage to the region. Railway expansion began at a furious pace, and it would continue its 4-foot 8.5-inch road gauge, duplicating the same gauge as the Pennsylvania Railroad. The terrain along the river was rocky, forested, with steep cliffs towering over the river. The curves would be long, for the river meandered serpent-like through the region. In some areas along the grade, like at Rockland and Kennerdell, the river literally made horseshoe bends, and since the track was laid on the east side of the river, the railroad bed had to be created around the U-shaped curve, adding additional miles to the track. The average road grade was to be 2.5 feet to the mile and was not to exceed 4 feet to the mile at any point. Numerous stone and iron bridges would need to be built over streams and rivers, as well as railway stations at every community along the route. Workers of all skills would be required: explosive experts, general laborers, track layers, stone masons, iron workers, carpenters, and surveyors, to name a few. Chinese laborers must have been brought in to work building the railroad, for when the railroad made its way to the Emlenton area, they reportedly lived in this building along the river, which was referred to by the locals in a very non-politically correct way. It was referred to as the Yellow Row, which I assume this was short for Yellow Row House. The Chinese workers must have provided much of the backbreaking manual labor needed to carve the roadbed into the side of the mountains. Since train engines of the day required coal for fuel and water to make steam, coal stations and water tanks needed to be strategically located along the route. Train line communications required telegraph lines, which were strung along the route, which would provide rapid communications for the isolated upriver towns. The railroad advanced one tie at a time, one rail at a time, one spike at a time, and one bridge at a time. The line snaked up the Allegheny, linking river towns like Gray's Eddy, Red Bank, Brady's Bend, Truby's Ripple, and Parker's Landing. In early 1865, the Allegheny Valley Railroad finally reached the borough of Emlenton, to great excitement for this small river town. And 3 years later, the railroad reached the mouth of Oil Creek. On January 8, 1868, the railroad company and the community of Oil City were ready to officially dedicate the 142-mile railroad that now connected the great city of Pittsburgh with Oil City and the burgeoning oil region. On that day, the town was in a state of excitement and ferment. The streets were full of people. Everything was a hustle and bustle. Hotels were busy preparing extra meals, and every room was being made ready for use. A great army of excursionists from Pittsburgh was coming to Oil City to help celebrate the formal opening of the Allegheny River Valley Railroad. Officers of the railroad, city officials of Pittsburgh, and other dignitaries were expected. An Oil City reception committee waited patiently for the arrival of the train from Pittsburgh, and finally, the sound of a bell indicated the approach of the train, which had 17 well-filled passenger coaches. As the train entered the station, Professor Brown's band from Titusville played upbeat, patriotic music. From the windows of these coaches, hundreds of hands waved in greeting. When the passengers left the coaches, they formed a procession and marched over Center Street Bridge and on to Main Street, where food and entertainment was provided for the visitors. About 9 p.m., there was a program presided over by WLA, who introduced the guest, Colonel William Phillips, president of the railroad, and William Frew and others, who spoke briefly on the significance of the completion of the railroad. At a late hour, the celebration came to an end, and the extension of the Allegheny Valley Railroad commenced operation. To accommodate the commercial appetite of the region, 2 trains ran daily in both directions from Oil City to Pittsburgh. The trip took about 8 hours. Local merchants and oilmen could now avail themselves of the freight service, bringing goods from all parts of the country, while the passenger coaches accommodated nearby settlements, shoppers, visitors, and commercial travelers to the city. But progress for the railroad and the region didn't stop there. On November 20th, 1871, the railroad line opened travel from the oil region to Buffalo, New York. Now, 3 trains departed daily from Pittsburgh to Buffalo and back, servicing all towns in between. In 1914, the road was upgraded with extended sections of more durable roadbeds, as well as train tunnels that were blasted through the mountains at Kennerdell and Rockland. These tunnels shortened the travel time by going through rather than around the great horseshoe bends in the river at these locations. Besides passenger service, the railroad facilitated and supported the growth of new industries that sprung up all along the rail line, including timbering, coal mining, glass manufacturing, and refineries, as well as jobs associated with the railroad. The Allegheny River Railroad truly became the lifeblood of the Allegheny River Valley. There's obviously much more that can be said about this valuable resource to communities that grew up along the beautiful Allegheny River, but that remains for another time. If you have enjoyed this video, you may also enjoy other of my videos, including the early Pennsylvania oil industry, iron furnaces in Venango and Clarion County, PA, and there's many more. And to see them all you have to do is just Google Rick Sheffer YouTube channel. One other thing before I sign off. Besides my videos, you may also be interested in my book, Coming of Age in 1950s Rural Western Pennsylvania, which is available on Amazon. The book follows the life of a young boy and his buddies growing up into manhood in a small town in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania in the 1950s. The book is about the time, the place, the people, and the events that formed coming of age in the 1950s. Now, I must admit I am prejudiced, but I honestly believe anyone who came of age during this time will quickly identify with their life experiences while enjoying a very pleasant travel back in time. So for now, I hope you enjoyed this video on the Allegheny Valley Railroad, and I wish to thank you for your very, very kind attention.